This is half of my Superman. That is because I completely forgot to print his freaking torso, which is currently printing in my Uniformation GK2. But while it prints, I'm gonna just get started on the rest of the model and to get ahead of the schedule. This is Groundeffected, and this is my second release on my Patreon. And so for this week, what we're going with is something that is actually trendy. Your mom. Now, unless you were living under a rock, then you would know that this week, the release of the new movie, Superman, has come out, and Superman has a dog. I'm not gonna explain this all to you. The concept of this statue is made up by Frankie, and I'm gonna let him explain everything to you right now.
When me and your dad first decided we were going to start doing models on Patreon, we obviously needed to start planning ahead. Now, we had Penny Belle ready for June and she looked gorgeous, but we needed something for July. Now, ideally, I would have done the Fantastic Four, but that is 4 different sculpts at a minimum. So you're looking at about £4,000 upwards, which for our second month, not really doable. We don't exactly have that much money to throw at it straight away. So instead, we need to commit to one sculpt. And the idea I had was to go for Superman.
Oh, cool. Yeah, right on. Well, he was the original, right?
Now, myself, like many people, have been very hesitant about the Superman film, but the more information that had been coming out about James Gunn and how much he was investing in it, it became a bit more clear to me that I think it's something I'm really going to enjoy, because James Gunn is the master of telling human stories with incredible backdrops. I mean, with Guardians of the Galaxy, he managed to get people crying over a talking tree and raccoon. He's going to be able to pull something out of the bag with Superman. And from some of the earliest interviews, that is apparent. He is instantly talking about his relationship with his family dog and how that completely transformed his outlook on canines in general. And that's exactly what he wants to include Krypto in this film. So that is a relationship that I decided I wanted this model to kind of focus on. Superman and Krypto, his dog, is not something that we've seen on the big screen before, and I'm really excited about it, especially as it looks like it's going to be kind of a focal point, that relationship between the two. And that relationship is something that I wanted to build upon for our sculpt. So we have got Superman playing fetch with his dog. That is the crux of it. That is the core concept of this design. But as a Superman, he's going to be throwing that ball and it's going to go further than any field can kind of contain. So I thought, why not put them in the sky? Why not have them on clouds? It's going to get across that message of their strength and their otherworldliness, but by having them in quite a calm, ethereal almost pose, where they're both really lightly floating on the clouds, you're going to get that softness to them, which will hopefully speak to the nature of the relationship between the two, that they are genuinely friends. In a world where Superman is rejected by almost all of humanity, where he is seen as an alien that is not welcome amongst us, he has man's best friend with him by his side. And that is exactly the kind of thing that I wanted to portray through this model. And I'm so excited to see this on our shelves. I mean, welcoming him into your front room or whatever.
It's like having Superman for your friend.
So now I've told you basically why I designed it the way I did. So let's get back to the main video and watch this thing be brought to life, which I've got to say is pretty exciting for me. This was just an idea I had ages ago, and it's nice to see it actually turning into a physical thing.
Thanks for that, Frankie. I just want to say our last release was actually this Penny Belle, and she's still going to be available for a little bit longer, only because I'm way ahead of schedule with this model due to trying to meet the time scale for trending topic. It's not often, but sometimes I need to clean out my airbrush, and this is one of those times, and the easiest way to do this is to take it apart and soak it in some alcohol, and then I use the Iwata lubrication that comes with my airbrush when I bought it to wipe all over the needle and everything else and put it back together, and I can start painting this model. Now I'm gonna start with explaining that in the last few videos I have literally not had any white ink, so while I use white paint for this, I'm going to caution you and tell you that this used almost a full bottle of white paint to do the exact same thing that a couple of squirts of white ink would do. This is because to get the white paint to go through your airbrush nice and smooth, you have to thin this down to unbelievable levels, and it just doesn't cover as well because you're thinning it down. But now that you've been sufficiently cautioned, I can move on to painting the shadows onto Krypto, and for this I'm going to use Griff Charger Grey because this is quite a bluey, cool kind of grey, and also the color that I'm going to use to shadow the clouds is going to be different, so we'll get to that when we get there. For now, I'm just going to take some red ink and paint that over the parts that I currently have printed for this model that are going to be red. And this is the part of painting where your zenithal really stands true. I know it seems like I'm covering up everything, but I am 100% not, and unfortunately some of the cameras don't pick up the exact same depth. You can see it a little bit more at the end when I actually turn the lighting down and show it all properly. But realistically, the zenithal is so important for these first few layers because this creates your contrast. And of course, contrast is very important if you want something to stand out, and especially if you want to create a highly saturated piece. You need to have contrast. Otherwise you're just not going to get those highlights. And while I leave these parts to dry, I just want to mention the artist who helped me to sculpt this model. His name is Lucas, and I'm going to leave a link for him in the description. Please go and show him some love. This is some of his past works that he's done, and he is proud of himself, and I wanted to show them to you in this video just so that you were aware of this incredible artist. The care for attention to detail and the thought that went into making this model between working with Lucas and myself is just something I'm super proud to be a part of. And of course, I want you to go and make sure you show him some love while I get back to painting the rest of the skin tones on Superman. Now, using some brown rose, I'm going to set up the basis for the skin tones, and this is a really good way to give yourself kind of the idea of where the skin tones are going to. And while that layer dries, I'm going to put the zenithal highlight layers onto the other parts that were printed a little bit later, because they are late to the party, but they're still part of this party. Of course, I'm being super careful to make sure that my highlights come specifically from the top, and again, this is how I make sure that there is shadows in the places that I need shadows, and obviously I can push those further if I absolutely need to. Now, with the body and the legs, these are mostly blue, and the place to get all the shadows from is actually from using a blue ink. This ink dries quite dark and it's nice and matte as well, which helps to create a nice dark shadow, but you can push this a little bit more if you use something like Drakenhof Nightshade. But I really like using Carabel Crimson for red areas, and because I use the red ink to paint it, obviously a red ink is not going to be dark enough, but Carabel Crimson is a really good color to get some nice depth, a real dark deep depth into red colors, and especially if it goes over those black areas, it kind of just tints that black nicely. Now getting onto the base, this is where I use a color called gray blue, and this is kind of like a lavendery color, almost like a desaturated looking lavender color. I don't really know why colors are named how they are, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, the next steps were for me to add some highlights onto the top portions of those cloudy bits to really push where the lights would be hitting this nice fluffy white cloud. Now I'm going to start working on the suit, and I'm going to use a really light blue, and I'm going to thin this quite a lot. This is probably like 30% paint with 70% water, and this is to help it kind of be a lot smoother as I spray this over the top of the suit, but also it means that I can build it up a little bit more rather than making it just a solid color, and it would just be such a stark difference between the previous blue and the lighter blue. Next step is to take some sunny skin tones and bring in some real lightness into that skin, because obviously the skin tone's not quite skin tony enough, so I'm going to have to add some highlights on top of that. With the hands and stuff, I'm kind of focusing on the foreground of them. I feel like with the right hand I maybe should have done it the reverse way, but it still works either way. The light is coming from the front of him, so it touches those parts as it should. I've been looking for a replacement for highlight skin, that color that I used from the Nocturna set, and this cream white seems to be doing an okay-ish job. Another replacement for another color is Orcish Dermis, and this, I think it was German orange or something, mixed with a little bit of red ink, kind of does a similar effect to Orcish Dermis, but again, it's not a perfect match. It does do the job though, and these are the only colors that I used for this model, so of course, if you like how it looks, then this is another way to use different paints to get a similar effect to what I normally get. Now I'm going to take some Gilliman Flesh and spray that into the shadows. This will tint all of the shadows a little bit browner, and that brownness is what's going to help to make him feel a bit more manly, in my opinion anyway. I then can take a bit of yellow and a very, very thin glaze, and I can spray that over all the skin tones, giving it a nice tint and bringing the saturation back. And And now that the legs are done and placed on the base, I can move away from them and work on different things, and the first thing I'm going to work on is the belt. Now, I did argue with myself over what the actual color of this is, and it does feel very much like it's golden in color and a little bit less like it's yellow. This is the same feeling I have for the symbol on both of the capes of Krypto and Superman itself. So to get this effect, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a silver down first, and then using a transparent top of yellow, which is this contrast yellow that I have, I'm going to paint this over the top of the silver that I laid down. I'm going to be very careful not to overlay colors, because if I wipe over the top of each other too much, then there will be streaks with this kind of paint. I then took a little bit of Yandan yellow and sprayed that into just the centers and mostly from the bottom of everything. Now, I will be honest, I did this on the chest symbol too, and this is kind of where I made a mistake. I should have masked off the chest symbol, but I didn't. You can slightly overspray Yandan yellow on red because it is an orange color, so it doesn't show up as much. Unfortunately, it does show up on blue, and so I should have masked this part off if you do paint this, but make sure to mask off just at this point. This is the only time I would mask, and all it is really is two small pieces of masking tape in the bottom corner of the S where I added the shade from that Yandan yellow. Now I'm going to take a nice bright red color and paint that over the top of the S symbol on the center of his chest. I'm pretty sure I used 2 coats of this just to make sure it was nice and solid, but also that it was nice and bright. Now, to work on that back symbol, I'm going to use the same process that I used for painting the belt as well. So I painted a silver over the entire symbol, and then I took, instead of actually painting it on this time, because like I said, this can overspray a bit on red, I just sprayed that on so that it made sure it was nice and smooth. Now I can paint the baseball that is in Superman's hand. Now, of course, after watching the movie, I realized that this ball probably should have been a very different ball, and I don't want to give any spoilers in case you haven't seen the movie yet, but there is a part where Krypto does actually in fact chase a ball, and it is just not this kind of a ball. But it doesn't matter. In this particular model, it makes sense to be a ball, as Superman is clearly an American superhero, and so thus forth there are obviously very many free baseballs around available for you to throw for your dogs. This is obviously how it works in my mind, and I don't care if you think anything otherwise. And obviously, since he found the baseball lying around, it's going to be a little bit dirty, so I used a bit of skeleton horde to shade this and make it seem like it wasn't a brand spanking new baseball out of the shop, because that would have been a bit weird, right? Exactly, that's what I thought. Moving on swiftly to painting the hair, and Superman for me has always had like a bluey kind of tinted black hair, so I'm going to paint his hair pitch black. And while that dries, I will move on quickly to painting the symbol on Krypto's cape itself, as well as obviously the collar too. So all of this got a nice healthy base coat of silver before I came back and sprayed or painted the yellow over the top. I'm actually not really sure why I painted this. Probably because it's a lot smaller than the big one on the back of Superman, and it made a little bit more sense that I can get away with not seeing the brushstrokes on this, but I definitely sprayed the Yandan yellow in because this would 100% show brushstrokes, especially if you put a layer over the top of a layer. I took a bit of skeleton horde and put that in the center of the symbol itself and around the edge, just to kind of give it a slight change from the top portion of the S and the bottom portion, and then moved on to giving a dry brush of white over the top of Krypto himself. This is to catch all of the lovely sculpted detail that Lucas has put in this model. And then I took some grey-greeny kind of colour and I painted that over his pads on his paws. I also used that same colour to paint his nose, by the way, and I felt like this just made sense with the type of dog that he is. He would probably have dark paws and not pink ones, because that would be a bit weird. Then I didn't film this part, but I thought I would just show you anyway, but I used some dark silver to paint the little balls on his collar, and I moved on to actually painting the nose like I said I was going to, with the exact same color. See, there is the proof of it up on the screen. What I failed to record though was I also took a little bit of black, which you can see now on my brush, and I wet blended that into the edges and the insides of the nostrils, and then moved on to painting the insides of the eyes. And this is the same way that I would paint female, like a large female statue's eyes, and I did this on purpose, again, to match with the whole theme of the type of dog. They usually have really black markings around their eyes, like just a very thin line. So we did that. I used a skin tone, which is that German tone color, whatever it is, to paint his tongue, and I highlighted it a little bit with some lighter skin tones. I then took this new cream white color that is the replacement for highlight skin, and I painted that into the eyes, and this is where you need to be careful to leave a very thin line of black around. I also used that same color to paint his teeth as well, and again, the same kind of thing. You don't want to just paint them solidly, you want to paint each individual tooth kind of like framing themselves so that the colors around them stick out just a little bit so they look individual. Now for the eyes, it is a dog, so dog's eyes are always going to be a dark color. Not always, because obviously some dogs, like huskies, may have bluey looking eyes, but most dogs have a dark brown kind of eye color, and so I used dark brown with a light brown, and I painted that over the insides of the eyes so that I could make a dark brown dog color eyeball color. Obviously I made them look back because of course Krypto is looking to Superman because he has the ball and he wants to get the ball. This is the attitude of dogs, and this is what makes this particular sculpture have so much meaning for me, mostly because I really do miss my own dogs from before I moved away from South Africa to England, but also because the feeling that you have from a pet, like even a dog or anything other than, it's just they look at you with such intent. Their entire world is you, and I wanted to make sure that that felt like that from Krypto's face, and I really do feel like I got that feeling out of it. And also much thanks to Lucas for making it look like that and making it easier for me to paint. Now moving on to Superman's face, and this is where I used, instead of black on his eyes, I actually used Magos purple on the insides, and then while that was drying I came back with some black over his eyebrows, which I did later on dry brush a little bit of blue onto them, but I don't think I showed that, so I'm just going to mention it now while I'm painting the eyebrows and it's fresh in my memory. Otherwise you will just wonder how they got a slight tint. I'm now going to move on to painting the upper eyelid. This is kind of like how if you paint a female, you would paint black on the female model because you need to get the eyeliner, but with the male model you kind of want to make sure that you don't put that eyeliner look, because then it looks like garliner and then everybody thinks you're a weirdo. And so to avoid that, I just painted a brown, dark brown over the top eyelid, and then I painted a pink over the bottom, and then came in with that cream white color over the insides of the sclera of the eye, and that pretty much shapes the inside of the eye very nicely. Now Superman must have some very pungent blue eyeballs. This is an important thing, I think, because it's the thing about him that stands out. His black hair and his blue eyes, which is somehow you could not put two and two together when he was wearing his disguise, but it must be the glasses. I should have maybe made a pair of glasses. Anyway, I'm getting very distracted. Let me just explain how I did the eyes. I painted the dark blue first, then the light blue, obviously, and then I used black in the center of those to paint the pupils. Now he faces directly forwards, and this is because he is intent on throwing the ball. He's looking where he's throwing the ball to, and this is what you would do when you are playing with your dog. You wouldn't look, well, maybe you would. Anyway, I'm getting distracted again. I did some dry brushing blue over the top of his hair, and this is to give it that nice classic Superman look that I feel like is how the hair should look, especially from the comics. And I also added a nice bright highlight on the insides of the eyes, and then when you dry brush things I find it looks too powdery, so I use Griff Charger Grey to settle that down and put it gloss clear over his eyes, and then I can call this model done. I must say, making my own models available for my Patreon has been a learning experience. Genuinely, it has not been easy. Figuring out how to work with the right artist at the right time and making sure that the model comes out how you kind of envision it. It's just very mind-boggling, the whole process. Also making sure they're ready on time. Dude, it is not the easiest thing, but I'm absolutely enjoying having my own visions and my own ideas. This model was conceptualized by Frankie, and seeing Frankie's idea come to life, even for me, is just as exciting. It's different because it's new, it comes from us, and it's not just from outside in the rest of the world. Now obviously everybody is doing their thing, and I want to support everybody as much as possible, so of course course, this was my video to support myself and to show off my Patreon, who of course I'm going to put all the Patreons up here on the screen right now so you can see who is supporting me over on Patreon. And I'm going to try urge you to go there. Of course, it is not maybe the best place for you. Maybe you don't like it. Try just 1 month. Don't sign up for a year and then ask for a refund, please, because that just doesn't make sense. Try 1 month of it, and if you like it, then join us for the next month. Other than that, there's not much I can say to you. Then if you didn't like anything you saw in this video, I don't really care, and you can kindly f*** off. Oh, by the way, there are 2 ways you can display this model. Obviously, they're designed to be in a line where he is standing, Krypto is in front of Superman, but high contrast helped us and made us a lovely additional cloud to add onto Superman, so you can separate the 2 models and have them displayed in 2 different ways on your shelf, and now you can